I'd just like to make the point that we're very fortunate that His Majesty has allowed us to use Buckingham Palace for this event, and I need to say that.
King Charles just made the most consequential decision of his entire reign. And the people who understand how the British monarchy actually works are absolutely stunned, not because it was unexpected, but because of what it reveals about everything happening behind closed palace doors right now. We are talking about a move so deliberate, so calculated, and so historically loaded that it has reshuffled the entire power structure of the Windsor dynasty in one stroke. Princess Anne, the woman the press largely ignored for decades, the royal who never chased a headline, the princess royal who kept her head down and did the work while others grabbed the spotlight, has just been handed the keys to the kingdom, literally. And the fallout is only just beginning. Before we get into what this really means, let me ask you something. When you think about real power inside the British royal family, who comes to mind? William? Camilla? Maybe Charles himself? The answer, as of right now, should be none of them. Because the person holding actual constitutional authority, the person with access to classified state documents, intelligence briefings, and the mechanisms that keep this country running, is Anne Elizabeth Alice Louise, Princess Royal, Counselor of State, and now, the most powerful non-monarch in British royal history. Stay with me here, because this story goes so much deeper than the headlines. The red box nobody is talking about. Let's start with the thing that triggered all of this, the red box. If you've never heard of the sovereign's red box, here's what you need to understand. This is not a prop. This is not decoration. The red box is the physical container that holds everything that matters in British governance. Classified intelligence reports, draft legislation, state correspondence, briefing papers from cabinet ministers. Every single day, the reigning monarch opens that box and engages with the real machinery of running the United Kingdom. It is the most direct, tangible symbol of royal constitutional authority that exists. And here's the thing that should make you sit up straight. That box just landed in Princess Anne's hands instead of Camilla's. Think about what that means. Camilla is queen consort. She wears the crown. She sits beside Charles at every state occasion. She is, by every ceremonial definition, the second most prominent figure in the royal household. And yet, when it came time to decide who actually gets to see what's inside that box, who gets to engage with the real business of the monarchy when Charles cannot, the king chose his sister. Not his wife, his sister. This was not an oversight. There are no oversights in the British royal family. Every decision, every appointment, every ceremonial gesture is deliberate and loaded with meaning. So when Charles made this call, he was saying something specific and unmistakable to everyone paying attention. He was saying, "I trust Anne with power. I do not trust Camilla with power." That is an extraordinary statement. And the question you have to ask yourself is, why? The crisis nobody will admit out loud. To understand why Charles made this move, you have to understand the pressure the monarchy is actually operating under right now. Charles is dealing with serious health issues. That is public knowledge. He has been open about his treatment, far more open than any previous monarch would have dreamed of being. And the British public has responded with surprising sympathy. But openness about health struggles does not solve the practical problem those struggles create. You cannot have a monarch attending medical treatments and simultaneously managing the daily demands of constitutional governance. Something has to give. So the question becomes, who fills the gap? The obvious answer, the answer that the line of succession would suggest, is Prince William. He is the heir. He is the future. Logically, William should be the one absorbing administrative responsibilities while his father focuses on recovery. That is what the textbook version of the Windsor succession would dictate. But here is what the textbook does not account for: real life. William is not in a position to carry that weight right now, and anyone who looks at his actual situation clearly understands why. Catherine has been going through her own deeply serious health recovery. William has 3 young children who need a present and engaged father. He is already shouldering an enormous psychological burden, the weight of knowing that the crown will one day be his, that every decision he makes now is preparation for a role he will carry for the rest of his life. To layer on top of all of that the full administrative demands of a monarch unable to govern would not just stretch William thin, it could genuinely break him. And Charles knows that. More importantly, Charles respects that. He is not going to sacrifice his son's stability and his grandchildren's relationship with their father on the altar of royal protocol. So he looked elsewhere. He looked at the one person in the entire family who has the experience, the credibility, the institutional knowledge, and, crucially, the lack of personal ambition that makes real power safe to hand over. He looked at Anne. Why Anne is the only person who could do this? Here is where this story gets genuinely fascinating, because Anne's qualifications for this role are not accidental. They were built across decades, through a combination of deliberate preparation by Queen Elizabeth and Anne's own extraordinary work ethic and character. Start with the basics. Anne is only 2 years younger than Charles. That is not just a number. That means she was present, actively, consciously present, during the same political eras, the same historical turning points, the same crises and transformations that shaped Charles's entire worldview. She does not need to be briefed on why certain constitutional precedents matter. She was there when they were established. That kind of institutional memory is irreplaceable, and in a moment of genuine governance crisis, it is worth more than any number of formal qualifications. But here is the factor that most people simply do not consider, and it is arguably the most important one. Anne has absolutely zero dynastic ambition. Now, you might be asking yourself, is that actually a good thing? Should the person holding state power not be driven and ambitious? In normal politics, sure. But in royal politics, having no ambition is everything. Because the danger in giving power to someone close to the throne is always the same danger, that they will use that power to advance themselves, to build their own faction, to position themselves or their allies for greater influence. That is how dynasties tear themselves apart from the inside. Anne is immune to that entire dynamic. Under the old rules of male preference primogeniture, the succession system that existed when she and Charles were growing up, Anne was actually born second, but eventually found herself pushed further and further down the line as brothers arrived. She got bumped. She got sidelined by the rules of a system that prioritized gender over birth order. And here is the remarkable thing. She simply accepted it. She did not fight it, did not resent it publicly, did not spend decades nursing a grievance about her place in the family hierarchy. What she did instead was work. She turned away from the question of position and turned entirely toward the question of purpose. And that decision, made quietly, without fanfare, without anyone really noticing at the time, is exactly what makes her the right person to hold power now. When Anne walks into a room with that red box, or delivers a communication from the king to the prime minister, nobody in that room suspects she is doing it for herself. There is no faction behind her. There is no rival bloc using her as a vehicle to undermine Charles. She is the messenger, and everyone knows it. She cannot become monarch even if she tried. There is no incentive for her to manipulate anything. And in a world of royal politics where every gesture is scrutinized for hidden motive, that kind of transparent integrity is absolutely invaluable. Elizabeth's master plan, the groundwork laid decades ago. What most people completely miss when they look at Anne's rise is that this is not a sudden development. This is the culmination of something Queen Elizabeth began engineering more than half a century ago. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, whenever the British Commonwealth faced a genuine crisis, not a ceremonial inconvenience, but a real moment of political tension and fragile diplomacy, Elizabeth sent Anne. Not to wave at crowds, not to open hospitals and pose for photographs. Anne was dispatched to the places where things were genuinely difficult. The tense negotiations, the Commonwealth relationships that needed careful, skilled handling, the situations where a wrong word or a misread gesture could cause real damage. Elizabeth was giving her daughter an education that you simply cannot get in a classroom or a briefing room. She was training Anne in the actual craft of statecraft at the highest level, sending her in with real autonomy and real authority to make decisions on behalf of the crown when the Queen herself could not be present. Decade after decade, assignment after assignment, Anne was quietly being shaped into exactly the kind of person the monarchy would need when things got complicated. And then, right at the end of her own life, Elizabeth made the move that locked all of it into place. In late 2022, as the Queen was entering the final weeks of her life and thinking clearly about what Charles's reign would require, she orchestrated an amendment to the Regency Acts through Parliament. She added both Princess Anne and Prince Edward to the permanent list of counselors of state. Not temporarily, not conditionally, permanently, for their lifetimes. Now, let's be clear about why this was such a strategically brilliant move. The old list of people technically eligible to step in and exercise the monarch's powers in an emergency had a serious problem. It was compromised. Prince Harry had removed himself from royal duties entirely, relocated to California, and was effectively operating outside the institution. Prince Andrew had become politically untouchable after his own devastating scandals. If something had happened to Charles and the existing list had remained unchanged, the people technically available to exercise state power were essentially people Charles would never actually want handling that power. Elizabeth fixed it. She did it through Parliament, which meant it was legally unassailable. She did it in a way that was dignified enough that Harry and Andrew could not publicly object without looking like they were arguing against their own irrelevance. And she embedded Anne at the heart of the succession of power in a way that nobody could challenge or reverse. Elizabeth was essentially saying, "When my son becomes king and faces the pressures that kings inevitably face, Anne is the person he can turn to. I am making it official so that when that moment comes, there is no ambiguity, no room for argument, and no possibility of interference. That moment is now." A lifetime of signals, the titles that told the story. If you go back and look at the timeline of honors and titles Anne has accumulated over her life, you start to see that the story of her elevation has been hiding in plain sight for decades. In 1987, Queen Elizabeth bestowed on Anne the title of Princess Royal. This is an ancient designation, one of the oldest in the British royal hierarchy, and it can only ever be held by one person at a time. Traditionally, it goes to the eldest daughter of the reigning monarch, but more than tradition, it carries a specific and serious implication, that the person holding it is expected to dedicate their entire life to service to the crown, not as a side arrangement, not when convenient, entirely and without reservation. It was Elizabeth's formal public statement that Anne was in a different category from other working royals. She was not just a member of the family contributing to the institution. She was singularly important to how the dynasty functions as a living entity. Then, in 1996, Anne was invested as a Knight of the Thistle, Scotland's highest order of chivalry. And this matters more than people realize, because it was not given casually. Anne had spent years doing genuinely substantive work in Scotland, building relationships, managing complex charitable commitments in communities across the country, engaging seriously with the real welfare of Scottish people rather than simply showing up for ceremonial appearances. The investiture was Scotland's formal recognition that Anne understood the country at a level that went far beyond photo opportunities, that she had earned the respect of the nation through actual sustained effort. And then came the coronation. When Charles was crowned at Westminster Abbey in May 2023, he made a choice that everyone should have paid closer attention to. He appointed Anne as his gold stick in waiting, a role with roots stretching back centuries, traditionally reserved for the individual the monarch trusts most intimately with their personal safety and security. So there was Anne in full military uniform, riding on horseback directly behind the Gold State coach as it carried Charles through the streets of London on the most important day of his reign. In front of the entire nation, on global television, with every camera in the world trained on that procession, Charles put his trust on public record. He showed the world who has his back, who he relies on, who he believes in completely. That was not ceremony. That was a declaration. The man behind the princess, Timothy Lawrence's quiet ascent. You cannot tell the full story of Anne's rise without talking about Vice Admiral Sir Timothy Lawrence, her husband since 1992, and someone whose own elevation within the royal household tells you everything about how Charles values this partnership. Timothy came into the royal world in the mid-1980s as a young naval officer, selected to serve as an equerry to Queen Elizabeth. He was not a prominent figure. He was not seeking visibility. He was there to work, observing the inner machinery of the royal household, understanding its pressures, learning what it actually takes to support a working royal through the relentless demands of a full engagement schedule. What Elizabeth noticed was how Timothy supported Anne, quietly, consistently, without ever demanding acknowledgement or needing the spotlight. Anne does over 450 official engagements per year, more than virtually any other working royal in the family. That schedule requires a partner who can absorb the stress, maintain the stability, and keep the infrastructure of their personal life functioning so that Anne can focus entirely on her public duties. Timothy does that. He has done it for over 3 decades, without complaint, without seeking credit. In 2011, Elizabeth honored him with a Knight Commandership of the Royal Victorian Order, the Queen's personal recognition of service rendered close to her and her family. But Charles went further. Recently, he elevated Timothy to Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order, the highest rank in that entire system. This is a gift entirely within Charles's personal giving, completely separate from any government or prime ministerial involvement. It is the king saying directly and personally, "I see what you have done. I know what you mean to Anne. I understand that her ability to do what she does depends in no small part on what you provide, and I am placing you in the innermost circle." It is, when you stop and think about it, a remarkable statement. And it tells you that Charles is not just elevating Anne as an individual. He is recognizing